The red phone on the wall wasn't plugged in, but I swore it watched me as I stepped into the WKRN booth for my first night shift. The station squatted on a lonely hill in rural Ohio, a brick box swallowed by cornfields, its antenna clawing at the starless sky like a skeletal finger. I was 24, broke, and desperate for work after a string of dead-end jobs, so when Ellen, the chain-smoking station manager, offered me the midnight to 6 a.m. slot, I didn't ask questions. The pay was barely above minimum wage, but it was cash, and I needed it. She handed me a coffee-stained manual and a key to the booth, her eyes glinting with something I couldn't place. "Follow the rules," she said, pointing to a crumpled sheet taped to the console. "Don't be like Gary." Gary was my predecessor, a guy who'd quit without notice a week earlier. I figured he got bored or spooked by the isolation. The booth was a relic. Peeling yellow wallpaper, a flickering fluorescent bulb that buzzed like a trapped fly, and a faint smell of stale cigarettes and something wet, like mold. The equipment looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s, reel-to-reel tapes, a dusty turntable, and a mixing board that hummed faintly, even when powered off. Outside, the world was dead quiet, save for the occasional rustle of corn or a distant coyote's howl. I'd always liked the idea of being a DJ, spinning classic rock for truckers and insomniacs, alone with my thoughts. It felt romantic, in a gritty, Springsteen kind of way. But that first night, as I locked the booth door behind me, the romance faded fast. The rule list was the first thing that threw me. It wasn't in the manual, which was just a dry rundown of how to cue songs and handle the switchboard. The rules were handwritten, the ink black and jagged, underlined twice like someone meant business. There were 10, scrawled on yellowed paper, the edges curling like they'd been taped there for years. Rule 1, keep the booth door locked at all times. Fair enough, creepy station, middle of nowhere. Rule 2, never answer the red phone. Weird, since the phone's cord dangled uselessly, not connected to anything. Rule 3, never play track 13. I glanced at the CD rack. There was an unmarked disc in slot 13, its surface scratched and smudged. Rule 4, if the antenna light turns blue, switch to the backup generator immediately. The rest were just as odd: don't look at the window after 2 a.m., don't acknowledge voices in the static, don't investigate footsteps outside. I chuckled, assuming it was some hazing ritual for newbies. Small-town stations were full of ghost stories, right? Gary probably got a kick out of writing this stuff before he bailed. I settled into the creaky chair, the leather cracked and smelling faintly of sweat. The console glowed faintly, its dials and switches casting long shadows. I popped in my headphones, queued up Born to Run, and leaned into the mic. This is WKRN, keeping the night alive with classic rock. I'm your new host, Jake, here till the sun comes up. My voice echoed in the empty booth, sounding smaller than I'd hoped. The listener line stayed silent, no calls, no emails. Just me, the music, and the hum of the equipment. I sipped lukewarm coffee from a styrofoam cup and tried to ignore the rules staring at me from the console. Around 1 a.m., I flipped through the manual, hoping for some context. It was standard stuff: how to adjust the EQ, troubleshoot static, log playlists. Nothing about the rules or why they existed. I glanced at the red phone again. It was an old rotary model, its plastic faded to a sickly pink, the receiver dangling slightly off the hook. I reached out, curious, but stopped short. Rule 2. My hand dropped. Instead, I checked the CD rack, pulling out the unmarked disc in slot 13. It was heavier than it should have been, the surface cold against my fingers. No label, no writing, just scratches that looked almost deliberate, like someone had carved them with a knife. I slid it back, shaking off a chill. The booth felt smaller as the hours ticked by. The fluorescent light flickered, casting jagged shadows that seemed to move when I wasn't looking. I told myself it was just the bulb, but my skin prickled. Outside, the cornfields were a black void, the window behind me reflecting only the booth's dim interior. Rule 9 nagged at me, don't look at the window after 2 a.m. Why? It was just glass, probably grimy from years of neglect. I forced myself to focus on the playlist, queuing up Hotel California. The opening chords filled the booth, soothing my nerves. I leaned back, closing my eyes, letting the music drown out the hum of the console. At 2:57 a.m., the static hit. It wasn't normal interference, crisp, sharp, like a needle in my eardrums. The speakers screamed, a sound like voices trapped in a fire, choking and clawing their way out. My headphones flew off, clattering to the floor. The console lights pulsed, dimming and brightening in time with the noise. I froze, heart slamming against my ribs. It wasn't just static, it felt alive, like it was trying to say something. I scrambled for the manual, hands shaking, but it had nothing on this. Then I saw Rule 7, if you hear voices in the static, do not acknowledge them. Stay silent until they stop. I clamped my mouth shut, gripping the chair's arms, staring at the clock. The second hand crawled. At exactly 3 a.m., the static cut off, leaving a silence so heavy it pressed against my chest. I didn't move for a long time. The booth was cold now, the air sharp, like I'd stepped into a freezer. The console lights steadied, but the hum was louder, almost a pulse. I checked the door, still locked. The window reflected my pale face, eyes wide, but I didn't linger. Rule 9. I grabbed the rule list, reading it again, the words sinking in differently now. These weren't a prank. They were a warning. I thought of Gary, quitting without a word, and Ellen's cryptic comment, "Don't be like Gary." What had he done? What had he seen? I made it through the rest of the shift on autopilot, playing songs, avoiding the window, and keeping one eye on the red phone. When dawn broke, gray light spilling over the cornfields, I unlocked the booth and stumbled to my car. My hands shook as I lit a cigarette, the smoke curling in the chilly morning air. I told myself it was just one weird night. Old equipment, bad wiring, my imagination running wild. I'd call Ellen later, ask about the static, maybe even laugh about it. But as I drove down the hill, the station shrinking in my rearview mirror, I couldn't shake the feeling that something in that booth had noticed me. And it wasn't letting go. The static scream lingered in my ears like a bad dream, even as I drove home from WKRN that first morning, the Ohio sunrise bleeding red over the cornfields. My hands still shook on the steering wheel, the cigarette I'd lit barely calming my nerves. The rule list sat crumpled in my passenger seat, its jagged handwriting burned into my mind, if you hear voices in the static, do not acknowledge them. Stay silent until they stop. I'd followed Rule 7, barely, sitting rigid in the booth as the clock ticked past 3 a.m., when the noise cut off like someone flipped a switch. But it wasn't just noise, it was alive, a chorus of anguish that clawed at my skull. I told myself it was the station's ancient equipment, some crossed signal from a distant broadcast. But deep down, I knew better. Something in that booth wasn't right. Back at my apartment, a one-room dump with peeling paint and a mattress on the floor, I couldn't sleep. The hum of the station's console followed me, faint in the buzz of my fridge, the flicker of my bedside lamp. I kept seeing the red phone, its cord dangling uselessly, and the unmarked CD in slot 13, heavy and cold when I'd touched it. I pulled out my laptop and searched for WKRN, hoping for answers. The station's website was a bare-bones page from the early 2000s, a grainy photo of the building, a schedule of classic rock shows, and a contact number I recognized as Ellen's. No history, no staff bios, nothing about the night shift. I dug deeper, scouring forums and local news archives. The only hit was a 2018 Reddit thread about haunted workplaces. A user named RadioGhost47 claimed they'd worked at WKRN years ago and quit because the night shift felt wrong. They mentioned rules but didn't elaborate. Their account was deleted. I closed the laptop, my stomach twisting. I called Ellen that afternoon, my voice hoarse from no sleep. "What was that static last night?" I asked, pacing my kitchen. "It wasn't normal." Her reply was sharp, like she'd been waiting for the question. "Old equipment, Jake. Happens sometimes. Just follow the rules." I pressed her about Gary, why he'd quit, what the rules were about. "Gary didn't listen," she said, her tone flat. "Don't make his mistakes." The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at my phone, her words echoing. "Mistakes? What kind of mistakes got you erased from a job like that?" That night, I almost didn't go back. My bank account was at $12.47, though, and rent was due in a week. I needed the gig, weird rules or not. I pulled into WKRN's gravel lot at 11:45 p.m., the station looming against the dark sky. The antenna's red light blinked steadily, a heartbeat in the void. I grabbed the rule list from my car, rereading it under the dashboard light. Rule 1, keep the booth door locked at all times. Rule 2, never answer the red phone. Rule 7. If you hear voices in the static, do not acknowledge them. I stuffed the paper in my pocket and headed inside, my flashlight cutting through the shadows. The booth was exactly as I'd left it, flickering fluorescent, stale cigarette smell, console humming like it was breathing. I locked the door behind me, the bolt clicking louder than it should have. The rule list went back on the console, taped down where I'd found it. I checked the equipment, cables tight, switches normal, nothing to explain last night's static. The red phone hung silently on the wall, its cord still unplugged. I avoided looking at the window, remembering Rule 9, do not look at the window after 2 a.m. It was only 11:50 p.m., but the glass felt like a presence behind me, heavy and watchful. I started the shift, queuing up Sweet Child O' Mine and forcing my voice to sound steady. WKRN, your midnight refuge for classic rock. Jake here, keeping you company till dawn. The listener line stayed quiet, no emails, no calls. Just me and the booth, the hum of the console louder tonight, like a low growl. I sipped coffee, bitter and cold, and tried to focus on the music. But my eyes kept drifting to the clock. 2:57 a.m. was coming, and I dreaded it. At 2:55 a.m., I double-checked the door lock and turned up the volume on Stairway to Heaven, hoping it would drown out whatever was coming. The console lights flickered, just like last night, and my stomach dropped. At exactly 2:57 a.m., the static hit, sharper this time, a wail that felt like it was inside my head. The speakers vibrated, the sound layering into voices, not just screams but words, garbled and desperate. "Jake," one hissed, clear as day. "My name." I yanked off my headphones, heart pounding so hard it hurt. The console lights pulsed, dimming the booth to near darkness. Rule 7 burned in my mind, stay silent. I clamped my lips shut, gripping the chair until my knuckles whitened. The voices grew louder, overlapping, some pleading, some angry, none in a language I could place. The air turned cold, my breath visible in faint clouds. I stared at the clock, willing it to move faster. 3 a.m. The static stopped, the silence heavier than before, like the room was holding its breath. I didn't relax. My hands shook as I cued the next song, Bohemian Rhapsody, my fingers fumbling on the controls. The booth felt smaller, the walls closer, the ceiling lower. I glanced at the red phone, still silent, still unplugged. The window behind me reflected the console's glow, but I didn't dare turn. Rule 9. I checked the rule list again, my eyes lingering on Rule 3, never play track 13. The CD sat in its slot, untouched, its scratches catching the light like tiny scars. I wondered what Gary had done to make Ellen so cagey. Had he heard his name in the static too? Had he broken a rule? The rest of the shift was a blur. I played songs, kept my head down, and avoided the window. The listener line stayed dead, but I felt watched, not just by the booth but by something beyond it. At 4 a.m., I heard a faint sound outside, footsteps, heavy and deliberate, crunching on the gravel. Rule 5, if you hear footsteps, do not investigate. They will leave by 5 a.m. I froze, listening as they circled the building, slow and steady, never speeding up or slowing down. My flashlight sat on the console, tempting me, but I didn't touch it. The footsteps stopped at 4:58 a.m., just as the rule promised. When my shift ended at 6 a.m., I unlocked the door and stepped into the gray dawn. The air was crisp, the cornfield silent. My car was exactly where I'd left it, but the gravel around it looked disturbed, like someone had walked a perfect circle around the station. I didn't look too closely. I drove home, the rule list in my pocket, my mind racing. The static wasn't a glitch. The rules weren't a joke. And whatever was in that booth knew my name. The gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled away from WKRN, the station's antenna fading into the dawn mist like a ghost. My hands hadn't stopped shaking since the static screamed my name at 2:57 a.m., a sound that burrowed into my skull and stayed there. The rule list, crumpled in my jacket pocket, felt heavier than paper should, its words, "Don't answer the red phone, stay silent," in the static, looping in my head. I'd heard footsteps outside the booth, circling the station until 5 a.m., just as Rule 5 predicted. They weren't coyotes or drunks wandering from the highway. They were deliberate, heavy, human. I didn't look at the disturbed gravel around my car as I drove off. I didn't want to know. Back at my apartment, sleep was a lost cause. The hum of the station's console followed me, faint in the buzz of my fridge, the flicker of my cheap lamp. My one-room place was a mess, empty beer cans, unwashed dishes, a mattress sagging on the floor, but it felt safer than the booth. I pulled out my laptop and tried digging into WKRN again. The Reddit thread from Radio Ghost 47 was still there, but no new replies, just that vague warning about the night shift feeling wrong. I searched Gary's name, hoping to find a trace of my predecessor. Nothing. No social media, no old news articles, no obituary. It was like he'd vanished. I called his disconnected number again, getting the same robotic, no longer in service, message. My coffee went cold as I stared at the rule list, now spread out on my kitchen counter. Rule 7, if you hear voices in the static, do not acknowledge them. My name in that static wasn't random. Something knew me. I called Ellen at noon, my voice rough from exhaustion. "Ellen, what the hell's going on at the station?" I said, pacing my tiny kitchen. "The static last night," it said my name. There was a long pause, just the faint crackle of her cigarette. "You're imagining things, Jake," she finally said, her tone sharp but unsteady. "Old stations get weird signals. Follow the rules, and you'll be fine." I asked about Gary again, pushing harder. "What did he do? Why'd he quit?" Her voice turned cold. "Gary thought he was smarter than the rules. He wasn't. Don't call me again unless it's an emergency." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, her words sinking in. Smarter than the rules. What did that mean? Had he answered the red phone? Played track 13? Looked at the window? I wanted to quit, to walk away and never see that booth again. But my bank account was down to $10.32, and my landlord had left a second eviction notice on my door. WKRN was my only shot at keeping a roof over my head. I showered, ate a stale granola bar, and forced myself to nap, but my dreams were all static and shadows, a voice whispering my name from a dark corner. I woke up sweating at 10 p.m., the rule list still on my counter, Rule 9 staring at me, "Do not look at the window after 2 a.m." I stuffed it in my pocket and headed to the station. The drive to WKRN felt longer that night, the cornfields darker, their stalks swaying like they were watching me. The antenna's red light blinked steadily, but it felt wrong, like a lure. I parked and sat in my car for a minute, gripping the steering wheel. The station loomed ahead, its brick walls stained with age, the windows black voids. I grabbed my flashlight and the rule list, locking my car before heading inside. The booth was the same, peeling wallpaper, flickering fluorescent, that damp cigarette smell stronger tonight, like someone had just been there. I locked the door behind me, the bolts click echoing in the silence. The console hummed, louder than before, a low thrum that vibrated in my chest. I taped the rule list back to the console, my eyes lingering on Rule 2, never answer the red phone. The phone hung on the wall, its cord still unplugged, its receiver slightly askew, like it had shifted since last night. I started the shift, my voice shaky as I leaned into the mic. "WKRN, your classic rock haven. Jake here, keeping the night alive." I queued up "Paint It Black," the Stones guitar riff cutting through the booth's oppressive quiet. The listener line stayed dead, no calls, no emails. Just me, the music, and the hum. I checked the clock obsessively, dreading 2:57 a.m. The static had come twice now, both times at the same hour, both times with voices. I wasn't imagining it. I checked the equipment again, tugging at cables, flipping switches, looking for anything to explain it. Nothing. The console was old but functional, no loose wires, no obvious faults. I avoided the CD rack, where track 13 sat, its scratched surface glinting under the fluorescent light. At 1:30 a.m. The booth felt smaller, the air thicker, like I was breathing through a damp cloth. The fluorescent flickered more often, casting shadows that seemed to twist when I turned my head. I kept my eyes on the console, away from the window behind me. Rule 9. I sipped my coffee, now cold and bitter, and tried to focus on the music. Roxanne played, Sting's voice sharp in my headphones. But the hum of the console was louder, almost drowning out the song. I turned up the volume, my hands sweaty. The rule list sat in front of me, Rule 7 underlined twice: "If you hear voices in the static, do not acknowledge them." I repeated it like a mantra, trying to calm my pulse. At 2:57 a.m., it came again. The static erupted, sharper and louder, a scream that felt like it was clawing at my eardrums. The console lights pulsed, plunging the booth into near darkness before flaring back. The voices were clearer this time, not just my name but others, overlapping in a frantic, guttural chant. Jake. Gary. Emma. Tom. I didn't know an Emma or Tom, but the names hit like punches. My headphones were off, but the sound filled the booth, vibrating the walls. I gripped the chair, my jaw clenched, following Rule 7. Stay silent. The air turned freezing, my breath clouding in front of me. The voices grew angrier, spitting syllables I couldn't understand, like a language scraped from a grave. I stared at the clock, the second hand crawling. At 3 a.m., the static stopped, the silence so sudden it felt like a weight on my chest. I didn't move for minutes, my heart hammering. The console light steadied, but the hum was louder now, a steady pulse that matched my heartbeat. I glanced at the red phone, still unplugged, still silent. The window behind me reflected the booth's dim glow, but I didn't look. Rule 9. The footsteps came at 4 a.m., right on cue, crunching outside, circling the station. Rule 5. Do not investigate. I sat frozen, listening as they moved, slow and deliberate, never faltering. They stopped at 4:58 a.m., just like last night. I checked the door lock 3 times before dawn. When my shift ended, I stumbled outside, the morning air cold and sharp. The gravel around the station was disturbed again, a faint path circling the building. I didn't look closely. I drove home, the rule list in my pocket, my mind racing. The static knew my name. The footsteps weren't random. And Ellen's warnings about Gary weren't just talk. I was in over my head, but I couldn't quit. Not yet. The WKRN booth felt like a trap as I locked the door behind me, the bolts click swallowed by the console's relentless hum. It was my fourth night, and the static's voices, hissing my name, Gary's, and others I didn't know, clung to me like damp clothes. The rule list, now creased and smudged from my constant handling, sat taped to the console, its jagged handwriting a silent command. Rule 7 had saved me last night, keeping me quiet as the static screamed, but the footsteps circling the station until 5 a.m. had left my nerves raw. I hadn't slept properly in days, my apartment's thin walls doing little to block the echo of that guttural chant, Jake. Gary. Emma. Tom. I didn't know who Emma or Tom were, but their names felt like warnings. I'd spent the day trying to dig deeper into WKRN, but the internet was a dead end. The station's website hadn't been updated since 2004, and the Reddit thread from Radio Ghost 47 was still just a cryptic hint about the night shift being wrong. I'd called Ellen again, my voice cracking as I demanded answers about the static, the footsteps, Gary. "You're tired, Jake," she'd said, her cigarette rasp cutting through the phone. "Follow the rules, and stop asking questions." When I mentioned the names in the static, her breath hitched, just for a second, before she hung up. That hitch told me more than her words. She knew something. My bank account was at $8.15, and my landlord had slipped a final eviction notice under my door. Quitting wasn't an option. I drove to the station under a moonless sky, the cornfields a black sea swallowing my headlights. The antenna's red light blinked like a predator's eye, steady and unyielding. I parked, my flashlight's beam cutting through the gravel lot. The disturbed path from last night's footsteps was still there, a faint circle around the building, deeper in some spots, like whoever, or whatever, had lingered. I didn't look too long. The rule list was in my pocket, Rule 5 burned into my mind: if you hear footsteps, do not investigate. They will leave by 5 a.m. Inside, the booth was colder than usual, the fluorescent light flickering like a dying pulse. The smell of stale cigarettes and mold was sharper, clinging to my throat. I locked the door, checked it twice, and sat at the console. Rule 2, never answer the red phone. I stared at it, half expecting it to ring, but it stayed silent. The window behind me reflected the booth's dim glow, a black square I avoided. Rule 9, do not look at the window after 2 a.m. It was only 11:55 p.m., but the glass felt alive, watching. I started the shift, my voice thin as I leaned into the mic. WKRN, your midnight rock fix. Jake here, spinning classics till dawn. I queued up Bad Moon Rising, the song's ominous chords matching my mood. The listener line was dead, no emails, no calls. Just me and the booth, the console's hum filling the silence between tracks. I kept one eye on the clock, dreading 2:57 a.m. The static had come 3 nights in a row, always at the same time, always with voices. I checked the equipment again, cables, switches, inputs, all normal. The CD rack sat untouched, the scratched disc in slot 13 catching the light. Rule 3, never play track 13. I hadn't touched it, but its presence gnawed at me. At 2:30 a.m. The air grew heavy, like a storm was brewing inside the booth. The fluorescent flickered faster, shadows twitching in the corners. I sipped my coffee, now ice cold, and turned up Sympathy for the Devil, trying to drown out the console's hum. My hands were sweaty, my pulse uneven. I glanced at the rule list, Rule 7 underlined twice: if you hear voices in the static, do not acknowledge them. I braced myself, the clock ticking closer to 2:57 a.m. The static hit right on time, a screech that felt like knives in my ears. The console lights pulsed, plunging the booth into darkness before flaring back. The voices were louder, more distinct, spitting my name alongside others: Jake, Gary, Emma, Tom, Sarah. A new name. My skin crawled. I yanked off my headphones, following Rule 7, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. The air was freezing, my breath visible in short, sharp puffs. The voices weren't just angry now. They were pleading, some sobbing, some snarling, all in that same guttural tongue. I stared at the clock, willing it to hit 3 a.m. The static stopped, the silence thicker than ever, like the booth was holding its breath. Then, at 3:15 a.m., the red phone rang. Its shrill bell cut through the silence, loud enough to make my teeth hurt. I froze, staring at it. The cord was still unplugged, dangling limply against the wall. Rule 2, never answer the red phone. The ringing went on, 10 times, each one slower, heavier, like a countdown. My hand twitched, instinct urging me to pick it up, to make it stop. But I didn't move. The booth felt smaller, the walls pressing in, the air so cold it burned my lungs. The ringing stopped after the 10th chime, leaving a silence that felt worse. I checked the door, still locked. The window reflected only the console's glow, but I didn't look too closely. Rule 9. The footsteps came at 4 a.m., crunching outside, circling the station. They were louder tonight, closer, like boots grinding into the gravel. Rule 5. I sat rigid, my flashlight untouched, listening as they moved, slow and deliberate, pausing every few steps. My mind raced: Gary, the static, the names, the red phone. What had he done? Had he answered it? The footsteps stopped at 4:58 a.m., as always. I didn't relax. When dawn broke, I stumbled outside, the morning air sharp against my skin. The gravel path around the station was deeper, the circle more defined, like something had paced it multiple times. I didn't linger. I drove home, the rule list in my pocket, my heart pounding. The red phone wasn't just a relic. The static wasn't just noise. And whatever was out there, circling the station, knew I was inside. The red phone's ringing echoed in my head as I sped away from WKRN, the station silhouette shrinking in my rearview mirror against a gray Ohio dawn. Last night's shift had been a nightmare, the static screaming my name and others: Gary, Emma, Tom, now Sarah. At 2:57 a.m., the unplugged red phone blaring at 3:15 a.m., and the footsteps circling the station until 5 a.m., heavier, closer, deliberate. The rule list, now a crumpled talisman in my jacket pocket, was my only guide. Rule 2, never answer the red phone. Rule 5, do not investigate footsteps. Rule 7, stay silent if you hear voices in the static. I'd followed them, barely, but each night chipped away at my sanity. My hands shook on the steering wheel, the gravel path around the station burned into my mind, a perfect circle, deeper than before, like something had paced it for hours. Back at my apartment, a dingy box with cracked walls and a leaking faucet, I collapsed onto my mattress, too wired to sleep. The console's hum followed me, faint in the buzz of my fridge, the flicker of my lamp. I saw the red phone in every shadow, its cord dangling uselessly, yet ringing like it was alive. I pulled out my laptop, desperate for answers about WKRN. The station's website was useless, a relic with a blurry photo and Ellen's number. The Reddit thread from Radio Ghost 47 was still my only lead, a vague post about the night shift feeling wrong, no details, account deleted. I searched Gary's name again, nothing. No Facebook, no LinkedIn, no trace. I tried variations: Gary, Ohio, WKRN, radio. A single hit came up, a 2010 article from a local paper about a WKRN DJ named Gary Miller winning a community award. The photo showed a grinning guy in his 30s, but the article didn't mention him quitting or disappearing. I called his old number again, still disconnected. I dialed Ellen at 1 p.m., my voice raw from exhaustion. Ellen, the red phone rang last night. It's not even plugged in. What the hell is going on? Her cigarette crackled over the line. You're stressed, Jake. Old stations have quirks. Follow the rules, and you're fine. I pushed harder, mentioning the names in the static, the footsteps. Who are Emma, Tom, Sarah? What did Gary do? Her silence was heavy. Then, Gary broke the rules. Don't be stupid like him. Stop digging. She hung up. That pause, that edge in her voice, it wasn't just annoyance. She was scared. I scoured the internet for hours, chasing dead ends. I found a forum for radio technicians, where someone mentioned WKRN's antenna picking up weird signals in the 90s, but no specifics. Another post, from 2015, claimed the station was built on an old farm with a bad history, rumors of a fire, missing workers, but the thread was locked, the user banned. My bank account was at $6.78, and my eviction notice gave me 3 days to pay rent. I couldn't quit, not yet. I showered, ate a stale bagel, and tried to nap, but my dreams were static and footsteps, a voice whispering, Jake, from a dark void. I woke at 10 p.m., sweating, the rule list on my bedside table. Rule 9, do not look at the window after 2 a.m. I grabbed it and headed to the station. The drive was oppressive, the cornfields a black wall under a starless sky. The antenna's red light blinked, but it flickered once, like a blink. I parked, my flashlight catching the gravel's circular path, now so deep it looked carved. I didn't linger. Inside, the booth was colder, the fluorescent light stuttering like a heartbeat. The smell, cigarettes, mold, something metallic, hit me harder. I locked the door, checked it 3 times, and sat at the console. The hum was louder, a deep throb that pulsed in my chest. The red phone hung silent, its cord still unplugged. The window behind me reflected the booth's dim glow, but I felt it watching. Rule 9. I started the shift, my voice barely steady. WKRN, your classic rock lifeline. Jake here, till the sun rises. I cued Black Dog, Led Zeppelin's riff cutting the silence. No calls, no emails. The console's hum grew, almost drowning the music. I checked the equipment, cables tight, switches normal. The CD rack sat untouched, track 13 scratched disc glinting like a threat. Rule 3, never play track 13. I sipped my coffee, cold and bitter, and watched the clock. 2:57 a.m. loomed. At 2:30 a.m., the air thickened, the booth shrinking around me. The fluorescent flickered faster, shadows twisting in my peripheral vision. I turned up Dream On, Aerosmith's wail filling my headphones, but the console's hum was relentless, vibrating my bones. My hands shook as I gripped the rule list, Rule 7 underlined, if you hear voices in the static, do not acknowledge them. I braced for 2:57 a.m. The static hit, a screech that felt like teeth on my nerves. The console lights pulsed, plunging the booth into darkness, then back. The voices were louder, clearer, a chorus of agony, Jake. Gary. Emma. Tom. Sarah. Beth. Another new name. My heart pounded, my mouth dry as I followed Rule 7, staying silent. The air froze, my breath clouding. The voices weren't just names now. They were sentences, garbled, in a language that felt ancient, wrong. One voice, clearer, hissed, "You hear us." I clamped my jaw shut, staring at the clock. 3 a.m. The static stopped, the silence suffocating. At 3:15 a.m., the red phone rang again. Its bell was sharper, angrier, shaking the booth. Rule 2. I stared at it, the unplugged cord swaying slightly, like something had brushed it. 10 rings, each one heavier, then silence. The footsteps came at 4 a.m., louder, closer, grinding into the gravel. Rule 5. I didn't move, my flashlight untouched, my pulse racing. They stopped at 4:58 a.m. When dawn broke, I stumbled outside, the gravel path deeper, almost a trench. I drove home, the rule list in my pocket, doubt gnawing at me. The station wasn't just haunted, it was alive, and it knew I was trapped. The station's gravel path was a trench now, carved deep by the footsteps that circled WKRN every night until 5 a.m., and I couldn't unsee it as I drove away, the dawn sky bruised purple over the cornfields. The static's voices. Jake, Gary, Emma, Tom, Sarah, Beth, had grown sharper, more insistent, last night, spitting my name like a curse at 2:57 a.m. The red phone's unplugged ringing at 3:15 a.m. had rattled my bones, and the console's hum felt like it was burrowing into my chest. The rule list, now a tattered lifeline in my pocket, was my only defense. Rule 2, never answer the red phone. Rule 5, do not investigate footsteps. Rule 7, stay silent if you hear voices in the static. But Rule 9, do not look at the window after 2 a.m. was starting to haunt me. I'd avoided it so far, but the window's black reflection felt like a pull, a dare. I was unraveling, sleep a distant memory, my life shrinking to the booth's flickering light and that endless hum. My apartment was no refuge. The console's throb echoed in the buzz of my fridge, the flicker of my lamp, even the drip of my leaky faucet. I'd spent hours digging into WKRN's past, finding only scraps. A 2010 article about Gary Miller, a deleted Reddit post about the night shift, a vague forum mention of a fire on the land decades ago. Ellen's voice, sharp and scared, looped in my head. Gary broke the rules. Don't be stupid like him. My bank account was at $4.12, the eviction notice giving me 2 days to pay or get out. I couldn't quit, but I couldn't keep going like this either. I tried calling Ellen again, my hands shaking as I dialed. Tell me what's happening, I said, my voice breaking. The static, the phone, the footsteps, what am I dealing with? Her cigarette crackled. You're in too deep to walk away, Jake. Follow the rules. That's all you need. She hung up. I threw my phone across the room, its screen cracking on the wall. I didn't sleep that day. My dreams, when they came, were static and shadows, a voice hissing, "You hear us," from a void. I woke at 9 p.m., drenched in sweat, the rule list on my mattress, Rule 9 underlined like a threat. I grabbed it, my flashlight, and a thermos of coffee, and drove to the station. The cornfields were a black abyss, the antenna's red light flickering more than it should, like it was struggling. The gravel trench was deeper, almost a moat now, the dirt inside churned like something had clawed at it. I didn't look too long. I unlocked the booth, the door creaking louder than before, and stepped inside. The air was freezing, the cigarette and mold smell mixed with something sharp, like copper. The fluorescent light stuttered, casting jagged shadows. I locked the door, checked it 3 times, and sat at the console. The hum was louder, a pulse that shook my ribs. The red phone hung silent, its cord dangling, unplugged. The window behind me reflected the booth's dim glow, but it felt heavier, like it was waiting. Rule 9. I started the shift, my voice barely a whisper. WKRN, your midnight rock fix. Jake here, till dawn. I cued Hotel California, the Eagles' eerie chords filling the booth. No calls, no emails. The console's hum drowned the music, vibrating my skull. I checked the equipment, cables tight, switches normal. The CD rack sat untouched, track 13 scratched disc glinting like a blade. Rule 3, never play track 13. I sipped my coffee, cold already, and watched the clock. 2:30 a.m. The air thickened, the booth shrinking, the fluorescent flickering like a strobe. Shadows moved in the corners, too quick to catch. I turned up Life in the Fast Lane, trying to anchor myself, but the hum was relentless, a growl now. At 2:57 a.m., the static hit, a screech that felt like it was tearing my eardrums. The console lights pulsed, plunging the booth into darkness, then back. The voices were louder, angrier: Jake, Gary, Emma, Tom, Sarah, Beth, Mark. Another name. They weren't just chanting now, they were screaming, pleading, some laughing in a way that made my skin crawl. "You hear us," one hissed, clear and cold. I followed Rule 7, staying silent, my hands gripping the chair until my knuckles ached. The air was ice, my breath clouding thickly. The voices spoke in that guttural tongue, words I couldn't grasp but felt in my bones, like a warning. The clock crawled to 3 a.m., and the static stopped, the silence crushing. At 3:15 a.m., the red phone rang, its bell sharper, like a blade. Rule 2. I stared at it, the unplugged cord swaying slightly, like a breeze I couldn't feel. 10 rings, each one louder, then silence. My heart pounded, my mouth dry. I didn't dare move. The footsteps came at 4 a.m., heavier, closer, grinding the gravel like they were right outside the door. Rule 5. I sat frozen, my flashlight untouched, listening as they circled, pausing longer this time, like they were testing the walls. Then I broke Rule 9. It was 2:30 a.m. the next night, my 5th shift, and the booth felt like a coffin. The air was so thick I could barely breathe, the fluorescent flickering wildly. I'd been avoiding the window, but the pressure was too much, like something was pulling my gaze. I turned, just a glance, and saw my reflection in the black glass, pale, eyes too wide, mouth open in a way I wasn't moving. I blinked, and it didn't. My heart stopped. The reflection's eyes darkened, its mouth stretching wider, unnatural. I spun away, my breath ragged, the booth spinning. I didn't look again, but I felt it, something watching, not just from the window but from everywhere. The static came at 2:57 a.m., the voices screaming my name louder, the footsteps heavier at 4 a.m. When dawn broke, I stumbled to my car, the gravel trench deeper, a faint handprint pressed into the dirt. I drove home, the rule list in my pocket, knowing I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. The handprint in the gravel trench outside WKRN burned into my mind as I sped away, the station's antenna a fading spike against the dawn. Breaking Rule 9 last night, glancing at the window after 2 a.m., had been a mistake. My reflection, pale and wrong, with eyes too wide and a mouth stretched unnaturally, hadn't blinked when I did. The static at 2:57 a.m. had screamed my name louder, the voices, Jake, Gary, Emma, Tom, Sarah, Beth, Mark, more vicious, spitting words in a guttural tongue that felt like it was carving into my skull. The red phones unplugged ringing at 3:15 a.m. and the footsteps circling until 5 a.m., heavier and closer, had left me shaking. The rule list, now frayed and smudged in my pocket, was my only anchor. Rule 2, never answer the red phone. Rule 5, do not investigate footsteps. Rule 7, stay silent if you hear voices in the static. Rule 9, do not look at the window after 2 a.m. I'd broken one rule, and the booth felt like it knew. My apartment was a prison of its own, the console's hum echoing in the buzz of my fridge, the flicker of my lamp, the drip of my faucet. Sleep was impossible. My dreams were static and shadows, that distorted reflection staring from a black void. I'd spent days digging into WKRN's past, finding only fragments, a 2010 article about Gary Miller, a deleted Reddit post, a vague mention of a fire on the land decades ago. Ellen's warnings, Gary broke the rules. Don't be stupid like him, were a dead end. My bank account was at $2.03, my eviction notice giving me 1 day to pay. I couldn't quit, but the booth was eating me alive. I tried calling Ellen again, my voice a rasp. I looked at the window, I admitted, expecting her to yell. Her cigarette crackled, then silence. "You're in deep now, Jake," she said, her voice low, almost sad. "Follow the rules. Don't make it worse." She hung up. That sadness in her tone, it wasn't just fear. It was pity. I didn't sleep that day. My eyes burned, my hands shook, and the rule list sat on my counter, Rule 9, a mocking reminder of my screw-up. I drove to the station at 10 p.m., the cornfields a black wall, the antenna's red light flickering like a dying star. The gravel trench was deeper, the handprint gone but replaced by faint scratches, like claws had scraped the dirt. I didn't look long. The booth was colder, the air thick with cigarette smoke, mold, and that sharp copper tang, stronger now, like blood. I locked the door, checked it 4 times, and sat at the console. The hum was a roar, vibrating my teeth. The red phone hung silent, its unplugged cord swaying slightly, like something had brushed it. The window's black reflection loomed behind me, heavier, alive. I didn't look. Rule 9. I started the shift, my voice barely audible. WKRN, your midnight rock haven. Jake here, till dawn. I cued Sympathy for the Devil, the Stones' rhythm a weak shield against the booth's weight. No calls, no emails. The console's hum drowned the music, a pulse that matched my heartbeat. I checked the equipment, cables tight, switches normal. The CD rack sat untouched, track 13 scratched disc glinting like a warning. Rule 3, never play track 13. My coffee was cold, bitter, useless against the exhaustion clawing at me. The clock ticked toward 2:57 a.m. At 2:30 a.m., the booth shrank, the air so thick it choked me. The fluorescent flickered wildly, shadows twisting like they had hands. I turned up Gimme Shelter, but the hum was louder, a growl that shook the walls. My hands trembled as I gripped the rule list, Rule 7 underlined, stay silent if you hear voices in the static. The static hit at 2:57 a.m., a screech that felt like it was ripping my mind apart. The console lights pulsed, plunging the booth into darkness, then back. The voices were a chorus of rage, Jake. Gary. Emma. Tom. Sarah. Beth. Mark. Lisa. Another name. They weren't just screaming, they were laughing, crying, begging, all in that ancient, guttural tongue. You saw us, one hissed, clear and cold. My heart stopped. They knew I'd broken Rule 9. I stayed silent, my jaw clenched, my nails digging into my palms. The air was ice, my breath thick clouds. The clock hit 3 a.m., and the static stopped, the silence a suffocating weight. At 3:15 a.m., the red phone rang, its bell so loud it shook the booth. Rule 2. The cord swayed, unplugged, impossible. 10 rings, each one a hammer to my chest, then silence. But then, at 3:16 a.m., the beige phone, the listener line, rang too. My stomach dropped. Rule 10, if both phones ring at once, play track 13 immediately. I stared at the CD rack, track 13's disc glinting like a trap. Rule 3, never play track 13. The phones kept ringing, relentless, the beige phone's light flashing in time with the red phone's bell. My hands shook as I reached for the disc, its weight cold and heavy, like it didn't want to be touched. I hesitated, Rule 3 screaming in my mind, but the phones wouldn't stop. I slid the disc into the player, my heart pounding, and hit play. The sound wasn't music. It was a voice, low, guttural, speaking in that same ancient tongue, each word sinking into my skull like lead. The booth's air thickened, the hum silent for the first time, replaced by a pressure that crushed my chest. The phone stopped. The console lights dimmed to a flicker. I didn't look at the window, but I felt it, something watching, closer now, not just outside but in the booth with me. The voice from track 13 kept speaking, slow and deliberate, like it was naming me. I yanked the disc out, the silence worse than the sound. The footsteps came at 4 a.m., louder, grinding the gravel like they were clawing at the walls. They stopped at 4:58 a.m. When dawn broke, I stumbled outside, the gravel trench a gaping wound, new scratches crisscrossing it. I drove home, the rule list in my pocket, knowing I'd broken another rule, and something had noticed. The voice from track 13 lingered in my skull like a parasite, its guttural chant clawing at my thoughts as I sped away from WKRN, the station's antenna a fading scar against the dawn. Last night had been a descent into madness, breaking Rule 9 by looking at the window's distorted reflection, then breaking Rule 3 by playing track 13 when both phones rang, defying Rule 2's warning to never answer the red phone. The static at 2:57 a.m. had screamed my name alongside Gary, Emma, Tom, Sarah, Beth, Mark, and Lisa, its tone vicious, knowing I'd seen the reflection, knowing I'd played the forbidden disc. The voice from track 13 wasn't music, it was a language, ancient and heavy, sinking into my bones like cold metal. The booth had felt alive, the air crushing, the console's hum silent for the first time, replaced by a presence that watched me. The footsteps outside, louder and closer, had clawed at the gravel until 4:58 a.m. The rule list, now a tattered lifeline in my pocket, was my only guide. Rule 5, do not investigate footsteps. Rule 7, stay silent if you hear voices in the static. Rule 9, do not look at the window after 2 a.m. I'd broken 2 rules now, and the station knew. My apartment was no sanctuary. The console's hum echoed in the buzz of my fridge, the flicker of my lamp, the drip of my faucet. Sleep was a fantasy, my dreams were static and shadows, that guttural voice from track 13 whispering my name from a black void. I'd spent days chasing WKRN's past, finding only fragments, a 2010 article about Gary Miller, a deleted Reddit post, a hint of a fire on the land decades ago. Ellen's pitying warning, "You're in deep now, Jake," rang in my ears. My bank account was at $0.87, my eviction notice expired. I'd begged my landlord for one more day, promising my next paycheck. Quitting wasn't an option, but the booth was consuming me. I tried calling Ellen again, my voice a rasp of desperation. I played track 13, I confessed, expecting rage. Her cigarette crackled, then a long silence. "You idiot," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't do it again. Follow the rules, or you're done." She hung up. That tremor in her voice wasn't anger, it was dread. I didn't sleep that day. My eyes burned, my hands shook, and the rule list sat on my counter. Rule 3 a mocking scar, never play track 13. I drove to the station at 10 p.m., the cornfields a black abyss, the antenna's red light flickering like a dying pulse. The gravel trench around the station was deeper, a gaping wound now, with claw-like scratches crisscrossing the dirt, some fresh, like they'd been carved that day. I didn't linger. The booth was colder, the air thick with cigarette smoke, mold, and that copper tang, now sharp enough to taste like blood. I locked the door, checked it 5 times, and sat at the console. The hum was gone, replaced by a silence that pressed against my skin. The red phone hung on the wall, its unplugged cord swaying slightly, like something was breathing nearby. The window's black reflection loomed behind me, heavier, waiting. I didn't look. Rule 9. I started the shift, my voice a ghost. WKRN, your midnight rock fix. Jake here, till dawn. I cued Bohemian Rhapsody, Queen's haunting chords a weak shield against the booth's weight. No calls, no emails. The silence was worse than the hum, like the station was holding its breath. I checked the equipment, cables tight, switches normal. The CD rack sat untouched, track 13's disc glinting, its scratches deeper, like they'd grown. Rule 3. My coffee was cold, bitter, useless against the dread pooling in my gut. The clock ticked toward 2:57 a.m. At 2:30 a.m., the booth shrank, the air so thick it choked me. The fluorescent flickered wildly, shadows twisting like they had claws. I turned up Sweet Home Alabama, but the silence swallowed the music, heavy and wrong. My hands trembled as I gripped the rule list, Rule 7 underlined, stay silent if you hear voices in the static. The static hit at 2:57 a.m., a screech that felt like it was tearing my soul apart. The console lights pulsed, plunging the booth into darkness, then back. The voices were a storm: Jake, Gary, Emma, Tom, Sarah, Beth, Mark, Lisa, John. Another name. They screamed, laughed, sobbed, their guttural tongue sharper, angrier. You played us, one hissed, clear and venomous. They knew about track 13. I stayed silent, my nails digging into my palms, blood trickling. The air was ice, my breath thick clouds. The clock hit 3 a.m., and the static stopped, the silence a crushing void. At 3:15 a.m., the red phone rang, its bell a scream that shook the walls. Rule 2. The beige phone, the listener line, rang too, its light flashing in time with the red phone's chime. Rule 10. If both phones ring at once, play track 13 immediately. My heart stopped. I'd played it once, and the booth had changed. The air alive with something watching. I stared at the CD rack, track 13's disc glinting like a curse. Rule 3. The phones kept ringing, relentless, the booth vibrating with their sound. My hands shook as I reached for the disc, its weight colder, heavier, like it was fighting me. I slid it into the player, my breath ragged, and hit play. The voice came again, guttural, ancient, each word a weight in my skull. It wasn't just speaking, it was chanting, naming me, naming them, a roll call of the damned. The booth darkened, the fluorescent dead, the console lights dimmed to a flicker. The air crushed my chest, my lungs burning. The phone stopped. The window's reflection shifted, a shape forming, tall, thin, with two long arms, its face a blur. I didn't look directly, but I felt it, not just outside but inside, in the booth, in me. The voice from track 13 grew louder, its words clearer, like it was learning my language. You're ours, it said. I yanked the disc out, the silence worse, the shape in the window lingering. The footsteps came at 4 a.m., grinding the gravel, clawing at the walls, stopping at 4:58 a.m. When dawn broke, I stumbled outside, the gravel trench a chasm, new scratches bleeding dirt. I drove home, the rule list in my pocket, a new rule scrawled in red ink, not my handwriting, never play track 13 again. The new rule scrawled in red ink, never play track 13 again, stared up at me from the crumpled list in my hand as I stumbled out of WKRN, the dawn sky over Ohio a sickly gray, heavy with the weight of what I'd done. Playing track 13 last night had been a mistake that broke the booth's fragile balance. The guttural voice, chanting in a language that clawed at my mind, had named me, named them, Gary, Emma, Tom, Sarah, Beth, Mark, Lisa, John, and the shape in the window, tall and thin with two long arms, had watched me, not just from outside but inside, in the air, in my head. The static at 2:57 a.m. had screamed with a new fury, knowing I'd broken Rule 3 and Rule 9, the footsteps at 4 a.m. grinding the gravel like they were clawing through the walls. The rule list, now frayed to threads, was my only tether. Rule 2, never answer the red phone. Rule 5, do not investigate footsteps. Rule 7, stay silent if you hear voices in the static. Rule 9, do not look at the window after 2 a.m. The new rule, in someone else's jagged red handwriting, felt like a sentence. I'd blacked out after yanking the disc from the player, waking in my car at 7 a.m., engine running, the list clutched in my fist. I couldn't go back. My apartment was a hollow shell, the console's hum replaced by the drip of my faucet, the flicker of my lamp, but it was no safer. Sleep was gone, my dreams were static and shadows, that shape's blurred face staring from a black void. I'd spent days chasing WKRN's past, Gary Miller's 2010 article, a deleted Reddit post, a hint of a fire on the land, but found nothing solid. Ellen's trembling voice, "You idiot. Don't do it again," was the only confirmation that the station was more than a job. My bank account was at 87 cents, my landlord pounding on my door, eviction notice expired. I called Ellen at 8 a.m., my voice cracked and hollow. "I'm done," I said. "I quit." Her cigarette crackled, a long pause. "You lasted longer than most," she said, her tone flat, no surprise, no argument. "Check your mail in a week." She hung up. I sat on my mattress, the rule list in my lap, her words sinking in, longer than most. How many others had sat in that booth? How many had heard their names in the static? I packed my life into a duffel bag, clothes, laptop, a few photos, and left Ohio that day, crashing on a friend's couch 3 states away in Indiana. The drive was a blur, the cornfields fading into suburbs, but the station's weight followed me. I kept the rule list, folded in my wallet, its red ink bleeding through the paper. I didn't sleep for days, jumping at every hum, every shadow. I checked my mail a week later, finding a plain envelope from Ellen, my final paycheck and a note in her sharp handwriting, "You did better than most." No apology, no explanation. I burned the note, but kept the rule list, unable to let it go. In Indiana, I got a job at a gas station, minimum wage, no night shifts. The hum was gone, but I heard it in everything, the buzz of the cooler, the flicker of streetlights, the static of a customer's car radio. I avoided mirrors, terrified I'd see that reflection again, pale and wrong, with eyes too wide and a mouth that wasn't mine. I didn't look out windows at night, Rule 9 burned into my brain. I tried to rebuild, to forget, but the station clung to me. At night, alone in my friend's spare room, I'd hear faint static in the silence, a whisper of my name in the dark. I'd check my phone, my laptop, the walls, nothing. Just my mind, or so I told myself. I stopped searching for WKRN online, afraid of what I'd find. The Reddit thread was gone, the forum posts deleted, Gary Miller's article vanished from the newspaper's archive. It was like the station was erasing itself. I didn't call Ellen again, didn't want to hear her voice. But I kept the rule list, reading it every night, its words a reminder that I'd survived, barely. The gravel trench, the handprint, the scratches, the shape in the window, they haunted me, but I was free. Or so I thought. One night, 2 weeks after quitting, I woke to a hum, faint but unmistakable, in my friend's apartment. The lamp flickered, the air cold, like the booth. I checked the rule list, still in my wallet, its red ink darker, like it was fresh. I burned it that night, watching the paper curl and blacken, but the hum didn't stop. I moved again, to a cheap motel, then a rented room, running from the sound. It followed, always faint, always there. The station wasn't done with me. I'd broken its rules, and it remembered. The hum followed me like a shadow, faint but relentless, seeping into the walls of the rented room I'd fled to in Indiana, 3 states away from WKRN's cursed booth. I'd quit the station 2 weeks ago, after playing track 13 and breaking Rule 9, seeing that distorted reflection in the window, pale, wrong, with eyes too wide and a mouth stretched beyond human. The static's voices, Jake, Gary, Emma, Tom, Sarah, Beth, Mark, Lisa, John, had screamed my name with a fury that knew I'd crossed a line. The red phone's unplugged ringing, the footsteps clawing the gravel trench, the guttural chant from track 13, they'd broken me. I'd burned the rule list after Ellen's note, "You did better than most," but its words were carved into my mind. Rule 2, never answer the red phone. Rule 5, do not investigate footsteps. Rule 7, stay silent if you hear voices in the static. Rule 9, do not look at the window after 2 a.m. The new rule, scrawled in red ink, never play track 13 again, had appeared in someone else's hand, a final warning I couldn't escape. I'd run, but the station wasn't done with me. My new life was a fragile lie. The gas station job paid enough to keep me in this motel room, a damp box with peeling wallpaper and a flickering bulb that echoed the booth's fluorescent. Sleep was a memory, the hum was everywhere, in the buzz of the motel's vending machine, the crackle of my neighbor's TV, the drip of the bathroom sink. I avoided mirrors, terrified of seeing that reflection again. I didn't look out windows at night, Rule 9 a reflex now. I'd stopped searching for WKRN online, the Reddit thread, Gary's article, the forum posts, they were gone, like the station was erasing itself. But it wasn't gone. It was in me, in the faint static I heard when the world was quiet, whispering my name in the dark. I tried to rebuild, to blend into Indiana's gray normalcy. I kept my head down at the gas station, ringing up cigarettes and energy drinks for truckers who didn't notice my shaking hands. But they saw my eyes, bloodshot and hollow, and some asked if I was okay. I lied, said I was just tired. My coworker, a guy named Mike, caught me jumping at the hum of the cooler one night. "You good, man?" he asked, his brow furrowed. I nodded, but he didn't push. I didn't tell him about the booth, the voices, the shape in the window. No one would believe me. I barely believed myself. I moved twice more, from the motel to a basement apartment, then a friend's spare room, chasing silence that never came. The hum followed, faint but persistent, in every light, every appliance. I bought earplugs, but they didn't help, the sound was inside me now. I saw scratches sometimes, faint claw marks on door frames or walls, like the ones in WKRN's gravel trench. I told myself it was the buildings, old and crumbling, but I knew better. The station was reaching, its grip tightening. I stopped answering my phone, afraid of hearing static instead of a voice. I didn't call Ellen again, her pitying dread, "You're in deep now, Jake," was enough. One night, 3 weeks after quitting, I woke to the hum, louder, in my friend's apartment. The lamp flickered, the air cold, like the booth. I checked my wallet, where I'd kept the burned remains of the rule list, but it was empty, the ashes gone. I didn't sleep again, sitting up with the lights on, watching the clock tick toward 2:57 a.m. Nothing happened, but the hum grew, a pulse in my chest. I moved again, to a cheap boarding house, but the hum was there, in the radiator, the ceiling fan. I saw the shape sometimes, not in windows but in shadows, a tall, thin silhouette with 2 long arms, its face a blur, watching from corners. I didn't look directly, Rule 9 screaming in my head. A week later, at 3:15 a.m., my phone rang, an unknown number. My heart stopped. I didn't answer, Rule 2 echoing, never answer the red phone. The ringing went on, 10 times, each one sharper, like WKRN's red phone. I let it go to voicemail, my hands shaking as I played it. 33 seconds of static, sharp and alive, filled with voices, Jake, Gary, Emma, Tom, Sarah, Beth, Mark, Lisa, John, and more, too many to count. Then, clear and cold, a whisper, Jake. My name, spoken by something that wasn't human, in that guttural tongue from track 13. I dropped the phone, the screen cracking, the voicemail looping until I smashed it against the wall. The hum didn't stop. It was in the air, the walls, my blood. I ran again, to a motel on the edge of town, paying cash for a room with no windows. I didn't sleep, didn't eat, just sat in the dark, the hum a roar now, the voices faint but constant, whispering my name. The shape was there, in the shadows, closer, its 2 long arms reaching. I didn't look, but I felt it, its presence a weight I couldn't shake. The station had followed me, across states, across lives. I'd broken its rules, and it owned me now. The voicemail played in my head, 33 seconds of static, my name a curse. I knew then, there was no escape. The booth was in me, and it always would be.